Chapter 2, Innate Behavior Patterns and Habituation. Behavior, remember that's anything a dead man can't do, according to behavior analyst Ogden Lindsley, can be organized into different types. Most of this semester, we're going to focus on learned behavior. But for this module in this chapter, Chapter 2, we're all about other behavior. The first two videos will be about innate behavior and the last two about habituation. But I want to make it clear that these different types of behavior are different from different response classes. So a different response class is about what the motor behavior is. For example, walking versus talking versus knitting versus kicking a soccer ball. Many response classes are always learned, right? It's hard to imagine any circumstance where anyone would consider reading and writing to be innate. But it's not the topography of the response, that is, its physical characteristics, that determines where it belongs in this chart. Here's an example. A heartbeat is a reflex, right? You don't need to learn to make your heart beat, but it can and does habituate, for example, to loud noises. There are also biofeedback techniques that you can learn to use to bring your heartbeat under conscious or voluntary control, making it a learned behavior. All right, with no further ado, Chapter 2, Part 1, Goal-Directed Systems. This video will cover the first two types of innate behavior covered in Chapter 2, reflexes and trophisms. Let's examine them through the lens of control systems theory. McFarland's control systems theory is a framework for understanding goal-directed systems, and it's one of the areas where psychology and engineering overlap. Control systems theory shows that intentionality, or a sense of purpose, is not required to accomplish things that might seem quite intentional. In fact, as the example in the textbook, A House's Heating System, shows, accomplishing certain goals doesn't require a mind or a will at all. Now, different homes have different heating systems, but let's say you have a furnace that's connected to a thermostat that's set to 65 degrees. Your thermostat doesn't know or want anything. It's programmed to do just three things. Number one, compare the house temperature to the reference temperature. That's the 65 degrees that you set it at. Number two, if the house temperature is below the reference temperature and the furnace is off, turn the furnace on. Number three, if the house temperature is above the reference temperature and the furnace is on, turn the furnace off. In control systems theory, the thermostat is known as a comparator because it's constantly comparing some actual input, that's the actual air temperature in the house in this case, to the reference input, again in this case, the setting of 65 degrees. The furnace is the action system because that's the machine, in this case, that actually changes the temperature, and the warm air that comes from the radiator is the output. Now, at this point, someone often points out that even though the thermostat isn't acting intentionally, the person who set the thermostat presumably was. Maybe so, but the reference input, that thermostat setting, doesn't have to be intentional for the system to work. A thermostat on the factory default setting will do just as good a job of maintaining that temperature as a thermostat that was set by a person. A reflex is a stereotyped pattern of movement that can be reliably elicited by presenting the appropriate stimulus. With a patellar reflex, that's the knee-jerk reflex, the appropriate stimulus is a tap to a spot below your kneecap, and the stereotyped pattern of movement is a small kick. Now, this reflex can be important for balance and proprioception. It helps prevent you from getting knocked over. Pretty much all humans have pretty much the same set of reflexes. You won't get a patellar reflex from someone born with no legs or an amputee who lost their legs above the knee, but the patellar reflex, like other reflexes, is not influenced by your culture, athletic experience, etc. Let's see if we can apply control systems theory to the patellar reflex. Can you identify the comparator, reference input, actual input, and action system? Here's a hint. It's similar to the spinal reflex arc described on page 32 of Chapter 2. Pause the video here if you want to work through this for yourself. In this framework, the reflex eliciting stimulus, that tap from a hammer, is what would be called a disturbance. All right, so whereas a reflex is the stereotyped movement of a part of the body, a trophism is an innate behavior that produces a change in orientation or relocation of the entire animal. There are two types of trophisms, kinesis and taxis. The difference between them is whether the movement is directional in relation to the eliciting stimulus. So a non-directional movement elicited by a stimulus is a kinesis, so singular of kinesis. And a directional movement elicited by a stimulus is a taxis, T-A-X-I-S, not taxis, taxis. And directional can be toward or away from. Humidity-seeking behavior in wood lice is a good example of kinesis. They need to stay in humid air to survive, and just like us, they can detect humidity at their present location, but if the humidity levels are too low, there isn't an easy way to tell where it might be more humid. So they start walking in any direction and keep walking until the humidity is high enough, and then they stop. Now this is literally a risky move, but if the humidity levels are too low to survive where you are, then you don't have a lot to lose. If we apply control systems theory, this feedback system is actually not that different from a house's heating. The actual input is the humidity level in the current location. The reference input is high humidity, whatever that means. We don't know exactly how wood lice detect the current humidity level. In other words, we're not sure what the comparator is, what's the equivalent of the thermostat. But we do know that motor neurons in the motor system are the action and locomotion is the output. Some animals and many plants are positively phototaxic. They move or grow towards the light. Many animals are negatively phototaxic. They move away from the light. You might have done a lab in high school biology class where you put earthworms in the middle of a pan, shine a light on one end, and cover the other with a book or something. Now, earthworm movement is a little bit less sophisticated than maggots, who move their heads from side to side as they're moving so that they go in whatever is the darkest direction, but both earthworms and maggots will always move away from the light.